Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host Khalid. But today we are going to highlight COP27 as we have been doing in the previous days as well, and we are going to concentrate upon what needs to be done as far as moving forward under the whole climate change the whole mechanism of climate change that has affected not only the world but Pakistan in particular of recent because of the floods and the dastardly effect that it has had on Pakistan, on its economy, on its people, on its health, with the 33 million plus people who've been affected by it, with the 1/3 plus Pakistan who's been under water. This has been highlighted time and again, and now at COP27 as well, this is being highlighted by our Premier Shehbaz Sharif Saab, our Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari Saab, and all the entourage that has gone with our Premier. COP27 is a very important forum. It is a forum where we highlight issues concerning climate change and where we make pledges. Antonio Guterres, who's of course the United Nations Secretary General, has highlighted Pakistan case time and again. Also he highlighted Pakistan's case yesterday when there was a joint press conference, and he has been to Pakistan. He has seen things firsthand. The effort is being put by all the parties concerned. How it is going to formulate into action, only time will tell, and at the end of COP27 will tell as far as the pledges and the actions that would be decided by the member countries are concerned. We have to move to a report and then we'll return with our special guest for today.
The UN's Climate Change Summit opened in Egypt for 2-week talks where nations are figuring out how to avert the worst of climate change. World leaders and diplomats framed the fight against global warming as a battle for human survival during opening speeches at COP27 Climate Summit in Egypt, with the head of the United Nations declaring a lack of progress so far had the world speeding down a highway to hell. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged nations to accelerate transition from fossil fuels and speed funding to poorer countries struggling under climate impacts that have already occurred, while warning that humanity has a choice: cooperate or perish. Speaking at the COP27 climate conference alongside United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif stated that Pakistan would need debt relief and would seek compensation for climate damage as it recovers catastrophic floods that cost the country some $30 billion. Despite decades of climate talks, countries have failed to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions, and their pledges to do so in future are insufficient to keep the climate from warming to a level scientists say will be catastrophic. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing, global temperatures keep rising, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible, so it's high time to implement climate pledges.
Now, to discuss this issue in detail, we've been joined by a very important guest. He is the resident representative of the UNDP Pakistan, Excellency Knut Ostby. Mr. Ostby, it's a pleasure to have you in the studios for this very important discussion on climate change, and I know that your organization is working diligently in that direction. So thank you very much, first of all, to have joined us. This is the 5th time that you are here in Pakistan. It was wonderful to know before the show began about your journey and your relationship with Pakistan as well. This time when you were in Pakistan, Pakistan is facing a huge brunt because of climate change and the effects of which Pakistan is more of a victim than, of course, a perpetrator. How do you see the efforts of the United Nations and the United Nations UNDP as well, in particular, as far as putting Pakistan out of this current crisis?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be here. As you know, since I came back 5 times, I have a great love for Pakistan, and it was devastating to see the impact of these monsoon floods, with 33 million people affected, at 1,700 people killed, and more than 2 million houses damaged or destroyed, not to speak of all the damage to infrastructure, livelihoods, etc. And it will take a momentous effort to build up again after this. The first and most important thing which is being done was of course first the rescue and then the relief operations to reach these people. There were almost 6 million people displaced and 12 million people in need of shelter. And the government stepped up and other organizations as well with rescue and relief operations. And the UN issued immediately a flash appeal, which now has been adjusted up to 816 million US dollars. Unfortunately, it still has a long way to go to be fully subscribed. I believe there is some $160 million fully committed to this appeal, which is of course falls far short of what is needed to cover the immediate humanitarian needs of people.
But you know, there's a lot of, there are needs, and those needs need to be met with. And I hope that the pledges that the United Nations has made, the twice, and the last being the 816 million US dollars, will be met with. And of course, COP27 is the ideal, one of the ideal forums to kind of discuss this and come to some kind of a consensus as far as how to make Pakistan come out of this current crisis that it is engulfed in. I'd like to refer to what Antonio Guterres, who's the Secretary General of the United Nations, said yesterday. And of course, he said it is unacceptable, outrageous and self-defeating to put climate on a back burner. We'll be discussing that with you in detail, but we have to go to a short break. Stay tuned. We've been joined during the show by Knut Ostby, resident representative, UNDP Pakistan. Welcome back, sir. You heard our Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Sahab talking to COP27. How important is Pakistan's case?
I think Pakistan's case is particularly scary because we see this devastating flood, a record flood for many decades. And we know that it is climate induced, and we know that it can happen again. And it can happen again more frequently. At the same time as this is happening, we also have other disasters elsewhere. For example, a big drought in the Horn of Africa, where 22 million people are on the verge of famine. But the Pakistan floods has an enormous scale that scares us for what can happen in future. There has been signs for a long time that climate change is not in the future. It is here today. Before this flood, Pakistan suffered from drought. We have...
There's also an estimation that by 2025, according to one report, Pakistan could also be one of the worst victims of drought.
Yes, Pakistan is one of the 10 most affected countries by climate change, although it emits itself less than 1% of the global climate gases. The Prime Minister mentioned the glaciers in the north of Pakistan. We call it the third pole. Pakistan has more than 5,000 glaciers, and they are melting more and more rapidly because of climate change. They accumulate lakes behind the glaciers that from time to time break through the glaciers and cause devastating floods in the valleys below. We've had a project with UNDP that tries to work on early warning systems and some flood protection works for these villages in 24 valleys, but this covers only one part of the need. There is a much greater need also in this area of work.
All right, Mr. Ostby, also I'd like to refer to what Mr. Antonio Guterres said at the, of course, referring to COP27. He said the world is on the highway to climate terror. He's also said, quote unquote, it is unacceptable, outrageous and self-defeating to put climate on the back burner. The world is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. When it comes to countries such as Pakistan and the damage that you've yourself seen firsthand, because you were here when the floods happened in Pakistan as well, what in your point of view has been the response from the United Nations and the United Nations agencies as far as helping Pakistan mitigate this crisis is concerned?
Yes, there are many dimensions of this. The government, of course, has stepped up in many ways and supported rescue relief and was the major actor and remains a major actor. The United Nations has launched a flash appeal for $816 million, which is unfortunately far from being covered with financing. There is about 160 million fully committed to this appeal, and a lot more is needed to cover needs for shelter, for food, water sanitation, etc., for these people who are displaced or are left without anything from on a day-to-day basis. The winter, as the Prime Minister mentioned, the winter is coming up. Of course. There will be special additional needs for shelter for the winter, and this is urgent. Now, in addition to that, the humanitarian assistance will only assist people for a short term. There is, as the Prime Minister also mentioned, there is the rebuilding of the country. There is bringing people their lives back, for people to take their lives back. This is also very urgent for people to move quickly from being victims and dependent on handouts to become functioning members of society again, and for them to start earning a living again, and therefore becoming an active part of who will rebuild the country.
Yeah, you know, the road is arduous, the road is a long one, and the road is a difficult one ahead, especially for a country like Pakistan that has too much on its shoulders already. And to add to that, we've had this these floods and the effect that it has caused on our economy, on our people, on the livelihoods of people as well. Our Prime Minister also talked about speedy approval for climate finance. He talked about the climate mitigation as well. What should we expect, in your point of view, from the decision makers and the leaders at this COP27?
We expect a lot. First of all, we expect global solidarity and justice, as the Prime Minister mentioned. We need ambition and acceleration towards the goals that have already been agreed. The Prime Minister mentioned the $100 billion per year that was agreed in Copenhagen and has not yet been, is yet far from being reached. Financing for adaptation is extremely important. There has been a lot of attention to what we call mitigation, which is reducing the emissions, but the climate change has accelerated to the extent that it is too late to depend only on reducing the emissions. We have to put at least 50% of our efforts into adaptation, into preparing people for future climate disasters more frequently, more severe. And this requires credible commitments by the leaders in COP27. It requires that some sacrifices will have to be made. There has to be international solidarity.
All right. Speaking of international solidarity, Pakistan's role is paramount as far as not only highlighting Pakistan's cause, Mr. Ostby, but also the cause of all those developing countries that are being affected by climate change. There are developed countries that are being affected by climate change as well. We've seen that across the world, in the West as well. Our Foreign Minister, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, talked to CNN very recently, and he highlighted climate change and the efforts that need to be done. This is what he had to say.
It's a fact that we have to address, and we all have to work together. It is a shared responsibility of the global community to come together to address not only adaptation, not only mitigation, but also loss and damage. You're absolutely right. Pakistan is, we contribute less than 1%, in fact 0.8% of the carbon footprint, but we are the 8th most climate stressed country on the planet, and in that sense there's an incredible injustice. While the financial commitments, as you mentioned, it's not 100 million, it was 100, I think it was 100 billion per annum, and unfortunately no, that target has not been met. We understand the world is facing incredible economic difficulties as a result of COVID, the war in Ukraine, and a whole host of other issues. So while we still need to sort of emphasize to all those countries that made that pledge that we may have missed the target, or we may be on track to miss the target, but that doesn't mean that we're still not obligated to meet that hard pledge. We also have to come out with out-of-the-box solutions, financial instruments that will allow us to finance adaptation, finance mitigation, and come up with ways to finance loss and damage.
All right, so Bilawal Bhutto Zardari Sahab, of course, highlighted the climate-induced changes that have happened in Pakistan and the need for climate mitigation and climate justice. And I think that is the need of the hour. Nevertheless, Pakistan has been affected by it. The pledges have been made as per Bilawal Bhutto Zardari Sahab. The response has not been as was expected, as also been highlighted by Mr. Ostby just before we showed you what Bilawal Bhutto Zardari Sahab had to say to CNN while being at COP27. How can, Mr. Ostby, countries like Pakistan build resilience to climate change? We've seen the destruction, the massive destruction that has happened this year. I hope it doesn't happen, but there is a possibility it could in the future years as well. How can we future-proof ourselves?
This is the question of the hour, and we need to build back better. There needs to be a climate resilience dimension in everything we do when we work on reconstruction, rebuilding from these floods. It can be at the technology level, on the technical side, in how you build bridges, highways, houses, etc. But also, very importantly, it has to do with settlements and agriculture, and how these settlements and agriculture are located compared to the river systems. It also has to do with management of water, in the case of floods, of course, and how these large volumes of water that normally come and come even more so during a flood season, how they are managed, how the strategy for barrages, etc., is worked out. Also important for climate change is preservation of for flood protection, preservation of forests. It is how we prepare for these glacial outfloods. But the bottom line is, though, that a flood of this magnitude you can prepare for to some extent, but there will still be some damage in a flood like this.
No matter how resilient we become, there will always be some kind of damage. But countries like Pakistan need to be made resilient, climate resilient, so that it can, because what has happened this year, Pakistan can already not afford. If this happens, God forbid, the next year or in a couple of years, it will put Pakistan further on a road to economic pressure and tension. And this is not what Pakistan wants. And I'm sure this is not what the world bodies or even the United Nations wants. Now, when our Prime Minister says that, talks about how we can deal, I mean, he puts a question mark on how we can deal with this gigantic task on our own, and it is the duty of the global north to understand our plight. How important is it for the whole world to have a collective approach when it comes to dealing with climate change and to help countries that have been affected by climate change?
It's, as the Prime Minister correctly said, this is an international problem. The 33 million people affected in Pakistan, they did not cause these floods themselves. They were caused by an international, a global climate change situation that has led to more frequent and more severe disasters. So, as the Prime Minister also said, the financing of the rebuilding will be a key question. How it is financed. It's an enormous amount of money. The needs assessments that the Ministry of Planning has done together with us estimate $30 billion of loss and damage, and $16 billion of needs for the rebuilding in public sector. In addition comes losses and need for rebuilding in private sector. This is, of course, an enormous amount of money. It will need to come from many different sources. It needs to come from grants, international solidarity from friendly countries. It needs to come from loans. It needs to come from private sector and public sector, from domestic and international sources. I think it's important that the world stands with Pakistan in this effort, and that everybody does what they can to help with this rebuilding.
All right. Mr. Ostby, also, when you look at the way the world has reacted to Pakistan, and there were a lot of surprises, an element of surprise as to what happened in Pakistan, do you feel in a personal as well as in a professional capacity that the world did not expect climate change to have such extreme effects in different countries? And do you feel that they were not maybe serious enough about what climate change represented to the world?
I think we have been in denial. It's, you may know that in 1972 in Stockholm there was a conference on climate change in Sweden, which basically laid out all the consequences of climate change that we see today. I think the world has been in denial since then. There's been a few instances where we have woken up and we have done more, and we are doing gradually more. But it is going too slowly. The climate change is catching up with us, and unless we do more and do it faster, we will see more and more of these disasters and other effects of climate change.
Mr. Ostby, our Prime Minister, during his address to COP27 a few moments back, talked about global climate risk index that needs to be created. How important is that in your point of view?
Yeah, the Prime Minister mentioned this in the context of how to organize and structure financing for loss and damage and financing for adaptation. There are funding flows for adaptation today for countries to mobilize preparation for future climate effects, but they are not sufficient. There needs to be a lot more coming to a country like Pakistan of this type of financing. As I mentioned, Pakistan is among the 10 most
vulnerable countries
to climate change, and it will need very significant adaptation work to be ready for future disasters, to be also adjusting to the gradual climate change that takes place.
Mr. Ostby, when our Prime Minister says that the COP rings alarm bells for humanity, what has happened in Pakistan also rings alarm bells from humanity. Do these alarm bells resonate around the world with the proper aggression or the effect that is needed to garner a response?
I think the Prime Minister is sounding alarm bells, the Secretary General is sounding alarm bells. I think we are not listening enough to these alarm bells.
All right.
We need to wake up and listen to them more. As I said, there is work going on, but it is not enough. We need more.
All right. As far as the SDGs are concerned, and of course the United Nations plans to mitigate effects of climate change are concerned, how aggressive is, in your point of view, the United Nations as an organization to combat climate change?
We have mobilized a lot. A very significant part of UNDP's program in Pakistan relates to climate change. I think we are mobilizing more and more, both in the UN, in governments, in private sector. But again, it's a question of financing, as the Prime Minister highlighted. There needs to be much larger finance flows going to this. And the reason we need to invest in this, and this goes also for the private sector, is that if you do not invest in these things, there will be nothing to invest in the future.
That is so true. You need to start working on it right now in order to remove the effects that could happen in the year or the next few years. And it is not just for our cause, it is for the cause of the coming generations and the generations that will come after that. The more we are lethargic on this, the more we are going to have effects like what happened in Pakistan, and even in a more severe form in the days and the years to come. What are the best innovation-driven actions and science-based decision-making that need to be implemented to combat the worst form of climate change, in your point of view?
There are many scientific and technological solutions. There is also innovative financial solutions that can be found. We have seen renewable energy moving forward, electric vehicles, etc. This will help reduce emissions. There are also new science in how to do flood protection, how to do early warning systems. Secretary General put out the goal for in 5 years, everybody should have access to an early warning system across the world. We have been doing some work on early warning systems for glaciers as well as for tsunamis in Pakistan. We know it works, and more needs to be done on that. But also on finance, innovative systems can be created. It's possible to make money on initiatives and investments that help address climate change. For example, in renewable energy, solar panels is one example. Also, how you manage agriculture, how you manage flood protection can also be turned into profitable business if you do it in a smart way.
Mr. Ostby, you talked about agriculture. You've also mentioned this in the past. Do you feel we need to modernize the way our agriculture industry works in order to be climate proof or climate ready for our future challenges? Do you feel we need to maybe move towards crops that are more climate resilient, or move towards a form of agriculture that could sustain effects of climate change?
Yes, I think in agriculture, technology and technological advances can do a lot to adjust to climate change. And in addition to that, also sound management practices is important, but I'm not an agricultural expert.
All right. Nevertheless, it's very important for the whole world to come together. You talked about the meeting that happened way back in 1972. I'd like to refer to something more recent, 2015 Paris Agreement. Do you feel countries still adhere to that?
I think the Prime Minister was referring to the earlier meeting in Copenhagen, where they agreed to pay $100 billion a year, which has not been fully adhered to, but there has been funding mobilized against that, far from being fully funded, but there is funding. For the Paris Agreement, there was an agreement to establish the International Green Climate Fund. That fund is working. It is receiving financing flows. There are 3 active projects in Pakistan, relatively large, from that fund. But it is far from enough. The funding flow to that fund is far from enough, and the funding flows to Pakistan from that fund is far from enough.
All right, Mr. Ostby, also, each of the 197 signatories to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, otherwise known as the UNFCCC, has its own concerns and interests, which makes reaching a consensus a kind of a challenge. Do you feel that there are some contentious issues that hamper this consensus? Can those issues be tackled with by all the 197 countries collectively, looking at the way climate change is affecting the world?
The negotiations at COP27 are complex, very challenging. It takes solidarity, it takes that everybody is willing to make sacrifices and do what they can for the world as a whole. Meanwhile, we do need to address here in Pakistan the response to the flood, and recovery needs to start urgently. The UN is ready to work with Pakistan. We are working already with Pakistan to stand up responses to that, both in relief and also UNDP has launched a recovery vision on working on livelihoods, on governance, on community infrastructure, and on the Building Back Better structure. A number of other UN agencies are also standing up programs. This was unfortunately made necessary by the climate change induced floods. We do need to address the immediate task at hand, but at the same time, as you said, we need the international solidarity to address the bigger issue of climate change.
I think that is very important, Mr. Ostby, to have a common consensus as far as climate change is concerned, because today it is Pakistan, tomorrow it could be any other country in our region or in the West as well. The world needs to be on one page when it comes to important issues such as climate change, and I hope that COP27 serves as that perfect forum where, looking at the example of what Pakistan has gone through, that the world might realize that this is an issue that needs to be tackled too. and tackle on an emergent and emergency basis. Thank you very much, Mr. Knut, Ostby resident, representative of UNDP Pakistan, to have come all the way to our studios to talk about climate change, COP27, the work of the United Nations, the UNDP, and how UNDP is also collectively working with other agencies in Pakistan and the United Nations to help make Pakistan a stronger nation. This is what we all want, to make Pakistan a stronger country, to make Pakistan a country where people can come out of whatever issues they have and build a strong foundation for a developed nation that Pakistan could call itself in the coming years. Thank you very much, Excellency, to have joined us for this very special interview. That was Mr. Knut Ostby. Ladies and gentlemen, COP27 continues. You've just heard our Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Sahab also talk about the important issues that pertain to Pakistan. Let's hope that COP27 serves, as I said, in the ending, as the perfect platform to tackle those issues and more. We hope for a more resilient and climate change resistant Pakistan and world. Allah Hafiz.